Oh yeah, so I was going to review the schedule a little bit. So we're working on this new project. We're learning a little bit about tone.js and creating sound in the browser. And we are going to add some visuals this week and add some effects. And we'll have our first assignment, which is making interactive sounds. So this is just, you know, the user hits the keyboard and a sound plays. It's really pretty simple, but you guys should feel free to, expand on that or make whatever you are inspired to make with that. For the second assignment, which I need to write up, is we're going to do generative sound. So we'll have to learn a little bit more about music theory and stuff like that, but we're mostly just going to use the computer to generate music for us, and we're going to add some different inputs and stuff like that. So we won't have the user playing sounds. We'll be creating sounds, from scratch. So that's kind of the two different ways we're going to look at it. So yeah, we're still in this first assignment, or it's really assignment 3 for the semester, but the first one for tone.js, making interactive
So,
sounds.
so we're gonna have two assignments with sounds.
Yeah, well, at least if we want
Okay.
to keep working with it, we can keep going with it. Um, but yeah, we'll have 2 to start. And so, as I mentioned, we're going to rewrite some stuff today using P5, partly because we want to start to add visuals, but also because P5 actually does a lot of stuff for us that makes it a little bit easier to work with tone as well. So I want to kind of take a look at what that looks like. Um, so I'm going to open up the project that we started last week, and we'll keep this as a reference here because we are going to borrow some of the code here, or at least recreate some of it, but we're going to start a new project with P5 and Tone together. And that way we're going to see what we can do with both of the libraries. So this is our old project. I'll put this into the class, into the voice chat as a reference. But I'm going to be starting a new one. I'm not forking it. I'm just completely starting a new version of this project so we can go step by step and go over everything that is different with a P5 version. So let me see if I can make a new thing from here. I'm going to click create, and I'm still going to go with the HTML, CSS, JavaScript template. And so let's call this tone plus P5 and click create replit. And okay, so here's our replit. I'm gonna get rid of some of this stuff in, oh, well, it replaced my old version. So I'm just gonna open a new tab. Sorry, let's open a new tab, go to replit, and go back to where we were, which I guess I can just click on the link that I just shared. So I'll do it that way. Okay, and so here's our project from last week where we were. Here's our new blank project. Let's just delete everything in the HTML. Uh, there's nothing in the script, so we don't have to worry about that. And we can leave the CSS, that's fine. Um, so this is our new project. I'm gonna go back to last week's project real quick and go to the HTML page and just copy this page because we don't really need the default HTML. I'm just gonna paste this in here. And keep in mind, you can always fork my examples, so you don't have to keep up with all of this as I'm going. You can always just fork this later. And so this already has a lot of the stuff we need. It has a link to our tone package, so we can leave that there. It has a link to our script, which we're going to edit in a second. And it has, stuff we need up here. We can actually change the title. So let's change this to P5 plus tone. And so that's what will show up in the website when we look at the live view. And we have our CSS link here. So everything else in here looks good. There's one thing that we're going to add in here, and that's the P5 library. So this is something that I kind of mentioned last week, but I want you guys to see that P5 is not something that has to be part of the P5 editor. It's just a bunch of JavaScript that we can use anywhere that we want to use it. So I'm actually going to get rid of this start button that I had last week because that's one of the things that P5 is going to do for us. And then I need to get a link to P5. So just like I did with here when I got my link to Tone, I'm going to get a link to the P5 library. So there's a few different places to find that. I'm going to go to the P5 website, uh, and let's see if we can find a link somewhere. So let's look at the get started, and let's see, this has a link to the editor, some downloading instructions. Let's see if we can find, I bet they have some HTML somewhere in here. Okay, there it is. Using a hosted version of the P5 library. So there we go. There's our script. This will open up a recent version of the library for us. There's also a history of older versions here. So we can see, oh wow, all the different versions of P5. But we obviously want to use the latest. I think that will be fine. So we're just going to copy this script tag right here. So I'm just going to select that and hit Command C on my Mac, or I guess I could just copy right here. And then we're just going to paste it right above the tone script. I'm not actually sure. I don't think it matters what order we do here because they're both just going to be loaded into our global script space. So I think we don't have to worry too much about um, what order these go in, but we'll see if there's an error, we can fix it later. So now I have my P5 script and my tone script, and I'm gonna talk about how we can use these together. And it's actually not too hard. It turns out that P5 and tone work really well together. They know about each other and they're friends with each other. So it's not gonna be too hard to get started with this. Um, so let's go back to my JavaScript program. So we'll open script.js. And so we'll get started here. So real quick, let's go back to last week's example. And remember in the script there, the first thing that we did was we waited for some user interaction to start the audio. And so P5, one of the things that's kind of nice is that you guys might remember that preload function that P5 has to load assets and images and things like that. We can actually use that to do a lot of the sort of asynchronous loading work that we have to do with tone.js for it to work correctly. So we can actually ignore all of this stuff. And we can just go right to preload and load in our instruments. So what we need to do first is just create some global variables. I'm going to make a comment first just to say what we're doing here. So P5 plus tone. This is our first one, so I'll say intro. And so we're going to add a sampler. We will load samples, and then we'll add events to play those samples. And a lot of this is going to be handled by P5 for us. So let's start. We need a global variable to reference our sampler so that we can load it in preload. We can play it in another function or in an event or something like that. So that's what we'll start with. We'll say let sampler. And I'm using let here, again, because I'm going to define it as a different, I'm going to give it a value later. So I have to use let so that I can reassign this variable in a little bit. I can't use constant here. So that's why I'm using let. So I have let sampler, and then usually in P5, I'm going to have a function preload if I have any external assets. And so for my sampler, I'm going to use the preload function to load the samples because I have to have a sample to load in order for it to work. So last time we stole a piano sample from the tone library. This time let's actually go over how to find a sample. I'll do this relatively quickly and then we'll put it into our project files, and then we can create our sampler based on that file. So it's not going to be a huge file. It's not going to take a whole lot of time to load, but we do need to preload any external assets we want to use so that we know that they're available before we start to try to use them to play the sounds. So let's get a sound. I'm going to go over to freesound.org, and I'm just going to choose a sound. This is a really good website for. I'll put a link to this in the voice chat, and I'll put a link to this in the video later as well. But this is a really good sound website for just downloading lots of different types of sounds. A lot of people upload recordings and sounds that they've created here, and you can download them for free. You do have to have a login to do the download. So I'm going to log in real quick. Hopefully I remember my password. Okay, sweet. So you do have to have a login, but it's free to use, and once you log in, you can download any of the sounds you want. So I want to get a sound that I can use for my sampler. Maybe I'll get like I'll do some drums, so maybe I'll get like a toms sample. Okay, so we have a low floor tom. Eh, not great. Let's see. Let's go to the next one. That one's pretty decent. I'll probably use that one. Let's listen to a couple more. Oh, I actually this one is nice. That's a good tom. Okay, I'm gonna go with this quiet one. Gal, do you have a
Doesn't
suggestion?
sound much like a dub.
What?
I like the last one actually.
This orchestral
The
one?
SRBM. No, the one under it.
Oh, this one?
Yeah. Sounds like a good floor one.
Okay. Okay, we can go with that. It's a bit long, but that's okay. We can actually shorten it if we want to. But yeah, let's go with this. So we have this process toms, and so we can look at some information here. We do want to remember where we got this, and its work is licensed under Attribution 4.0 license. So I think we've seen this before, Attribution 4.0, or maybe I'm remembering a different thing, but if we click on this, we can just really quickly look at what we're allowed to do with this sound recording. So this is a Creative Commons website. Attribution 4.0 means that we can share, we can adapt, so we can include it in our project, which is what we're going to do. But we have to follow some terms. We have to give appropriate credit to the original author or creator of the sound. And that's it. There's nothing else that we have to do. So that's not too bad. What we'll do is we'll just link to this in our code. So I'll put a link here. And then I'll go back to my comment. Before I even download the sound, I'm going to say Tom sample by, and then I'll just put this link here. So, that's not, it's not going to be visible on the published page of the website, but I think this is good enough that it's in the comments of the code to just give attribution to this creator. So now let's download it. I'm just going to click download, and that'll go into my downloads folder. It's going to have a really long name, so I'm probably going to change that. But let's go back to Replit, go over to the file system, and we're just going to, first I'm going to add a folder and call it samples so we can keep things organized. Then I'm going to add a file. Oh, wait, no, I want to, whoops, I want to upload a file. So add a file is to create like a new script or HTML file. What I want to do is upload a file. So I'm going to click on the dots menu, go to upload a file, and there's that Tom file that I just downloaded. And now it's here. I'm going to drag it into the samples folder. And there we go. And I'm going to rename it. So I'm going to click on this and then click on the dots and click rename. And I'm just going to call this tom-003.wave. And one of the things with the sampler is it's actually going to pitch my sample. And it doesn't matter a whole lot unless you're trying to do like a melody or a harmony or something like that, which we're not quite there yet. But it is going to pitch this sound. So we might want to know what the original pitch was if it had one. We could try to guess. It doesn't say on here. So let's listen to it. So it's kind of a high pitch. It's probably like it's not an A4. It might be like a C5 or something like that. So it doesn't really matter for this particular example because we're not going to be doing like a lot of harmonies with this tom, but just keep in mind that the sampler is going to pitch your samples. So it's going to use this as a base sample, but then it's going to try to pitch it relative to all the MIDI notes. Okay, so we have our sampler. We have our sample. Let's build our sampler. So I'm going to go to the P5, or sorry, the tone API. So I'm going to go to tone.js.github.io and go to API, and let's search for our sampler. And here we go. So this is how we create a sampler. We just have our sampler, we say new tone.sampler, and then we have this object with our parameters inside. So we talked about objects for the first time last week, so we're going to keep kind of reviewing them. And there's a few things we need here. We need the URLs, we need the MIDI mapping that we're going for, And again, we don't really know much about this quite yet, unless you've already studied music in a different capacity. But I'll talk a little bit more about it next week when we talk about sort of like melody and harmony and sequencing and stuff like that. But then we need a base URL, and we're going to ignore this onload for now because we're using the preload for the P5. So we just need this bit. Um, so let's go back to Replit. And so we're going to say sampler gets new tone.sampler. And then remember, we always need to connect our instruments to our uh, speakers. Basically, like we're putting a wire from our sampler into our amplifier. So we have to say dot to destination at the end, and this is going to connect to the browser's audio context. So then inside, I'm going to put the parameters here. I could just write an object directly into here, but that's going to make our syntax look a little confusing. So let's create a variable for this. We'll say sampler parameters. I'm going to shorten it to sampler params. And then I'm going to go back to my global values. And for this one, I'm going to use a constant because it's not going to change. So I'm going to say const and then sampler params. And then I'm going to define this. So first we need the base URL, which is the URL for our project, which you can just grab right here. It's going to be different for every project. So you need to just grab it from the URL bar in the web view. So I'm going to copy that and type base URL. So this is like the folder where all the samples are. And then at the end of this, I'm just going to add in that samples folder that I created up here. So this is a little bit of a review for last week, but it's good to kind of go over this again. So this is just where to start. It's not that full URL for the sample. So after I have that parameter, I put a comma for my next parameter. And the other parameter I have is just all of the URLs for my samples. And I only have one, so it's not too bad. So URLs is its own little object. So I use the curly bracket syntax again and make a new object. And in here, for every MIDI note that I want to map to a sound, I just put that MIDI note. I'm going to go with
Professor,
C4 for this one. Yeah.
Professor, shouldn't the U in base URL be uppercase?
You would think so. You would think so if we were using, oh, it is, it is. Okay. I always get this backwards. So base URL is done correctly, onload is not done correctly. So the U is capital here, the onload is not written in camel case. I always forget which one it is, but thank you for pointing that out. So our U is correctly done in camel case. Thanks. Okay, so we have our base URL fixed. We have our URLs. I'm going to go with C4 for this. This is the middle of the piano. And if it sounds weird, it's fine. We're not doing anything too crazy right now, so it'll be okay. We can fix it later if we need to. So anyway, I know where it is. It's in this samples folder. And now I just want to map my sample to the note. So I'm going to put here tom-003.wave. And that's it. That's my one URL. I'm going to put a trailing comma here because I might add more later. But the cool thing about the sampler is it will actually pitch this sample to match all of the other notes. So we don't need one sample for every note. Although if we had them, it would probably sound a little bit better, but our sampler is going to take care of that for us. So now we've got our sampler. Let's collapse this. And now we actually are pretty close to being able to play it. So now I'm going to go to function. And remember, P5, after we do preload, we do setup. And for our setup, let's just try playing the sampler. So let's say sampler. And remember, if we want to play a sample from a sampler, we use this trigger attack release. So I'm going to copy that and go back here. So sampler, trigger, attack, release. And remember, this just starts, the attack is the beginning of the note where it may, start playing automatically, or we may kind of, increase the volume over time. And the release is just releasing that note. So it's the end of the note. So for our sampler, the note we want to play is C4. We'll just start there. And the duration for now, let's just do a quarter note. We'll talk about that more in a bit as well. And let's see if this works. We may need to actually add an event, but let's just try running this for a second. Okay, so yeah, we probably need to add an event in here. Let's see. Oh, how do I get this thing bigger? This is the one part I don't like about Replit is the console is kind of weird. Okay, so it didn't look like it called setup. Let's see if it called setup. Let's say console.log. Hello? In which case I might not have done P5 correctly. Okay, no, it's working. So yeah, it's not letting me do this because I need to call an event. So let's skip this for now. In setup, uh, I'm just gonna leave it uh, there. Well, actually, let's just change this. So remember, so this is the next part that P5 is going to do for us. So remember last time we had to actually create our events. So inside of our setup function last week, we set these keyboard events. So we are listening for a key down, and then we're calling a key down event. P5 does that for us. So that's another thing that's nice with P5 is that we don't have to write this code anymore. Our key down is P5's key pressed. So you guys might remember that from last semester. If not, that's okay. We can just replace this with key pressed. And now when we press a key, this should work. So I'm going to run. I have to click over here to focus this, and then let's try playing it. Oh, no, it's not quite working. So let's see. Let's say console.log key and see if we get a key. Okay, maybe we need a setup function for P5 to run. So let's just do setup and say console.log setup. Oh, okay, let's actually add our canvas because maybe P5, I can't remember, but P5 might need the canvas to be focused. So let's create our canvas. We'll get back to our sampler in a second. So remember in P5, the first thing we always do is create a canvas. So I'm going to create a canvas and I'm going to set it to window width and window height. So it'll take up the full available window. And let's go ahead and just draw a background just for the heck of it. Let's do it. So let's say let's do a background. Let's do blue. Okay, there we see P5 is working. We created our canvas and we are drawing our background. So now let's see if our key press works. There we go. Okay. Okay, so now we can play our drum. It sounded pretty good actually. The other nice thing about the key pressed in P5 is it actually turns off this annoying JavaScript repeat thing. So now if I hold a key, nothing else happens. It just plays it once. We didn't actually get this far to have to deal with that in our other script,
But
but
the note, the sound itself isn't cannot be, stretched out. Can
oh,
it?
yeah, you'll see what it sounds like in a second. So we're still just playing C4. So it's just playing the default sample right now, but we'll add the other notes in just a second. Okay. So anyway, so we've got our key pressed. We can see what key is being pressed because remember in P5 we just have key. It just saves the key for us. So remember in our last week we actually had to take this event and then we had to find the key code from that event and then we had to associate that. So now we just use key. P5 just takes the event for us and puts the key there. And so now we already have the key. So now we can add our notes. So that's the next thing we're going to do. So let's actually just copy and paste that from last week's script. So I'm going to go back to the script from last week and scroll up. One of the things we created last week was a notes object that has a reference for one full scale from C4 to C5 in the major key. And so it also tells us which key it is. So this is mapped to the row of the keyboard starting ASDF through GHJK, and that will play us one scale. So we want to keep this. Let's just copy and paste this and put it back here. And there's one improvement that we're going to make to this that I'll show you guys in just a second. So the nice thing with our object is we actually need the key code here. So let's log the key code. So that's the key and the key code. So the key code, remember, is the number associated with each key. And it's a little bit better to use than the key itself because the key can change in different browser contexts where the key code is always the same. So we're just going to map the key code to our notes. So all I have to do for that is I'm going to say constant note equals notes at key code. And there's one error with this, which I'll go over in just a second. But before we do that, we're going to take our note and we're going to put it into our sampler. Whoops, just this note, not the whole thing. So I'll put that into our sampler. And so now we should be able to hear different notes. Okay, so that's pretty fun. Here's the problem.
Sounds like you're just tightening the leather
Right.
of the top of the drum.
Yeah, it sounds like tuning a drum. Um, okay, so here's the one issue is if I hit a key that's not in the notes. So like if I hit Q, there's an error. It doesn't break the whole program. I can go back to playing notes that work, but I don't like these errors. You don't want to have errors in your code. So there's an easy way to fix this, which is to check to see if the key code that we're looking for is inside of our notes object. That's easy to do in JavaScript. We're checking for something, so we're using a condition. So I'm going to say if, and then we just want to see, does notes have the key 65 or 83, whatever the current key happens to be. So we just say if notes, and remember our bracket notation from objects is what we're using here. If notes has this key code, then we're going to grab that note and play the sampler. And if it doesn't, then nothing's going to happen. And that's fine because we only, we only have so many keys in a scale. Okay, so that's pretty fun. So we can play a lot of different samples of this tom, and yeah, it pitches it. So that sounds kind of cool. I guess we might want to be able to not pitch it, but we could go over that maybe if we have time. Oh, let's hide these files so then I'll have a little more space over here. Okay, so that's great. We're using P5 and we're still playing sound. And we've also solved, we have like a lot less code than we had before. We have almost the same sketch, but we actually have a lot less code. So P5 is doing a lot of stuff for us, and tone.js is also doing a lot of stuff for us. So that's nice. Um, so we fixed the issue with our notes. We made our sampler. We created our little canvas, and we're drawing our background. So that's pretty good, actually. I do want to add a couple more things. Let's see, I think that's like everything that we had before. We had the synth, and you can put the synth in here just like the sampler. So that code would work just the same. But I don't think we really need to do much else. So let's do a couple more things, and then I'll give you guys some class time to work on this. Um, so let's actually, yeah, let's draw some stuff. So since we've got this all set up, let's actually draw some stuff. And so what we can do is let's make our note, or actually we can use this again. So in our draw function, one of the things that we want to go over is the fact that we really don't want our draw settings and our audio settings to be tied to each other. Um, Right now, it's not going to matter that much, but next week when we start doing like sequencing and more complex stuff, it's really bad if your computer is trying to draw something and playing audio at the same time. So that's why we have our sampler over here doing its thing and our draw function doing its thing. It's going to draw graphics. And so you would think like, okay, I plus this sample, I also want to draw something to go along with the sample, but we really don't actually because we want the two parts of our program to be doing separate things, but we also want them to be synced. So what we can do is look at what key we're pressing, and then uh, we can um, we can use the same note to tell what key we're pressing, and then draw something based on that note using the same code, but ignoring what's happening with the sampler. So we can use basically the same thing here. But one thing that we want to do is we also want to know when the user is not pressing a key. And P5 doesn't actually really tell us that. Well, it does actually with key is pressed. Maybe I was going to do like a key is down function, but maybe I don't even need to do that. Yeah, we can just say if key is pressed. Okay, so let's try that. Let's see how it goes. We can change it later if we want to. So We can say in P5 if key is pressed. So you guys might remember from MMP 210, this just tells us if any key is pressed. So for this example, I'm just going to start drawing a piano. It's a little cheesy, and you guys can draw whatever you want, but it's just like an obvious thing to do. So if key is pressed, let's draw a rectangle. So I'm going to draw a rect. I'm going to draw it at x is 20 and y is 20, and I'm going to make it, let's say, 50 pixels wide and 100 pixels tall. That should be fine. That should be good enough. And so let's try it out. Okay, there's our first piano key. So we want to move it across the screen according to which note we're pressing, right? So let's get our note. So the key code is going to stay the same. So let's grab our note and actually let's grab this whole bit of code. Okay, so let's go in here. So if the key code is inside the notes, then we'll figure out what note we're playing, and then we can basically figure out where we want to draw a rectangle based on that note. So now, how do we do that? Well, there's a few things that we could do. We could take the note name, but they're not really in order because we're not playing the notes in order of the keys. We're playing them in order visually on the keyboard, which is not the same order, right? It goes 65, 83, and then back to 68. So that's not really going to work. We could use the note itself. We could say like if there's a C in there, play it somewhere. So that's another way we could do it. Uh, or we could just make another map. So what I'm going to do is just make another map here. So I'm going to say constant, and I'm going to say key positions. And I'm literally just going to copy this map here and paste it here. And there's probably better ways to do this, but this will be fast. So I'm just going to put numbers here for where I want my notes to be. So for 65, I want that to be at 20. And then my notes are 50 wide. So I'll say 20. And for the first one, I'll just say 20 plus 0. And then I'm just going to add 50 each time. So 20 plus 50. There's definitely better ways to do this, but I just want to, oh, should be 100,
Yep.
not 150. So this one is 20 plus 150, 20 plus 200, 20 plus, and what I should really do is make I'm doing this so dumbly. Let's do a constant key width equals 50. And so then we'll do 0 times key width and 1 times. So even though this is kind of a dumb way to do this, it doesn't have to be 100% dumb. We can do 2 times key width, 3 times key width. So we're just moving our piano keys across the page according to which key is pressed. I'll probably have to rewrite this to make it make more sense at some point, but this is good enough for now. So then we have 20 plus 6 times key width, and finally 20 plus 7 times key width. Okay, so now we have a map like our notes map, which is also object. You could call it a map or an object or a dictionary. It's kind of all the same thing. That maps the key that we've pressed to the position that we want. And so now, just like we have constant note, up here, constant note equals notes at key code, what we'll say instead is if key positions has this key code, then we'll take our X value and we'll set that to key positions at key code, and we'll put X in here. So now we should have like a piano, maybe. Okay, not bad. So you don't have to draw it as a piano. You don't have to make it like representational in that way. You could just draw random shapes. You could say like instead of a number here, you could say a shape that you want to use and check that. There's a lot of different ways you could take this. I just wanted to show one kind of example of how to visualize this thing. You could also just use colors. Like I don't have to do a whole map here. If you want to do something simpler, let's do it down here. I could just say if key code equals 65, that's an A, then, let's just draw some random circles. So I'll say circle at random width. Hopefully you guys remember random from P5, random height, random for size, let's do 200. So now if I hit the A key, we'll see the piano. Oh, I got an error. Whoops. What did I do? We're gonna have to open it in another browser to get a real error message. So let's check it out. Oh, I don't have an error. I don't know why. I don't know what that is. Let's run it again. Okay, so now when hitting A, I get all these random circles. It's probably, not great for, it's a little too glitchy, but you can see what I mean. You can draw different things. It doesn't have to be a piano, something representational. It could just be something fun. You could put an image here. We could give this a color. We could say fill random 255, random 255 random 255. I'm not, you shouldn't necessarily do exactly like this, but just as an example, oh, now the fill is going to change my piano keys too. So I could do that for, this is the A key. I should probably put a comment here that says A key. So using the map is one way to do something if you have like, a bunch of numbers that you want or a bunch of notes that you want, but you don't have to do it that way. We can just use a simple if statement. If the key code is 65, let's draw a bunch of random circles. If the key code equals 66, or no, 66 is not one of my keys, is it? What's my next key? 83. 83 is my S key. So if I hit the 83 key, let's draw a rectangle. So we'll say rectangle, and we can do, well, I guess we can just do more random. I'm having a hard time coming up with more exciting things to do than just total randomness. But you guys hopefully get that, there's a lot of different ways you could take this. This is just a couple different examples. So there we get some nice rectangles. Okay, so I think that's everything I want to cover for tonight. We have a very new version of this program, which I hope is a little bit easier to read because we have less random stuff that we're doing and we're doing more with just our code. And now we have some visuals to add as well. And I do want to add effects. So we'll do that on Wednesday. And I also want to go over, well, we can add another sampler, but if we want a sampler that doesn't pitch our samples, we have to do something a little bit different. So maybe we'll do that on Wednesday. So yeah, I think that's good for now. I'm gonna stop the recording, see if there's any questions.